Brilliant. And welcome everybody. My name's Caroline Drummond. I'm the Chief Executive of LEAF, Linking Environment and Farming, and it is absolutely lovely to see everybody. Can I request that you keep your mic on mute, but if possible, do keep your video on, because it's really great for our speakers to kind of engage with you and understand what your feelings and reactions are as well. So please do that if possible. We are recording this session, and it will be distributed not only through our usual channels from a LEAF perspective, but also through the AgriCapture CO2 website and other sources. So if you are not happy for being involved in that, then I guess you'll have to go, because we'll be recording it. In addition to that, I just would like to introduce two of the LEAF team in particular who are very involved. I know many of you will obviously know Claire Mike, our Director of Business Development, who is today the puppeteer for the event, and she will be looking at your questions, but also putting in hashtags and websites for what we are launching today, which is the AgriCapture CO2 Horizon 2020 project. I'd also like to introduce Becky Davis from the LEAF team, who is our lead on the project here as well, before I introduce our speakers. We will be running some polls during the meeting as well, so you will be able to kind of interactively do that as we go through the Zoom meeting, and do give us your views. As with all our surgeries, we hope you will be enlightened, entertained, but also inspired. I know today will be no different. It's a surgery special, so it is a little bit longer. And as I said, it is the exciting launch of the Horizon 2020 project, AgriCapture CO2. Our speakers, there are 4 guests. Igor Milosavljevic, who will be really giving the overview of the project. Celia Nysens, who's going to be talking around the communications and our engagement on particularly sort of the interactive elements with farmers in particular. And then we'll have a sort of questions and answers specifically to them. Our next 2 speakers will then be Phil Jarvis from GWCT, who'll be talking around training and the engagement in that area, and Duncan Farrington, LEAF demonstration farmer, and he will be talking about the farming side as well. Just to give you a little bit more detail about our speakers, Igor has been very involved in many European projects on various topics, but he is a huge contributor in terms of some of the circularity agreements on innovation around civil engineering. He holds an MSc in Natural Resource Management and Plant Science and a BA in Economics and International Development Studies. Celia works on agriculture and food policies on the European Environmental Bureau, a Brussels-based umbrella organisation representing 160 organisations across Europe. She holds a BSc in Political Sciences and Global Environmental Policies. Before joining that, she's worked on food, agriculture and climate change policy in Scotland. Phil Jarvis, I'm sure many of you will know, he's Head of Farming Training and Partnerships at GWCT, the Allerton Project, talking very much around the forefront of the practical interface between research and farming, around regenerative agriculture, agroforestry and climate-friendly approaches to integrated farm management. He's also a LEAF Innovation Centre, and he chairs the voluntary initiative and involved in many other industry aspects. Duncan, well, we could spend all day talking about Duncan because it's a bit of a special week for him. So not only is he a LEAF demonstration farm, brought and born up on Bottom Farm down in Northamptonshire, or up in Northamptonshire. He is a 4th generation farmer, but he has been doing cold pressed oilseed rape with Farrington's Yellow Mellow, which is very much a award-winning bottle of cold pressed oilseed rape. He is very active in terms of, again, regenerative agriculture, supporting good soil management. And he was sort of certified as both plastic and carbon neutral, the first in the world I think that was last year's achievements. This year's achievement, he's just been awarded the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Development in Sustainability. So congratulations, Duncan. And if you didn't hear the wonderful Tom Heap's 39 Ways to Save the Planet, one of his last guests was Duncan Farrington as well. So wow, we've got a great lineup of speakers. So please get your questions ready for them. Can I just make one request that you do turn your computers on to mute? I see, thank you very much, Mr. Infelix Hot SE. Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, well, to kick off, this topic is a really exciting one. I think we all know some of the challenges. Well, of course, we know the challenges around climate change. It's a very special year with COP26 ahead of us, but finding practical solutions that actually drive change is something that's really, really key. And we're so pleased as an organisation to be involved in what is the beginning of the journey for AgriCapture CO2. The goal within the project is to develop and launch a commercial platform that facilitates zero emissions aspirations on a large scale. By empowering regenerative agriculture, measuring and monitoring the resulting soil carbon sequestration. Using agricultural land as carbon sinks is a key piece of that puzzle. We all know the tree story, we know the planting of hedges story, we know the peat restoration story, but actually that active part of what farmers can do and be recognised and rewarded is what this is about. Achieving zero emissions. And we hope to make it easier and more profitable for farmers to adopt these practices at the end of the day. So without any to do, Igor, I would really love to introduce you, and if you can unmute please and tell us a little bit about what the project is really looking to achieve. Thank you, Igor.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you all for attending today. I'll give you a brief snapshot of the project. Of course, there's not a lot of time to go into detail, but I hope that this at least, so to say, gives an idea and starts the conversation. So climate change, of course, this is an important issue. It's of course very critical. If agricultural soils are managed in a certain way, they can increase the carbon, their carbon content, and therefore the carbon stored within them. This means that there would be less carbon in the air, which if applied on a large scale means we can slow down climate change. We interpret this as a climate action superpower, and we want to make it easier and more profitable for farmers to become superheroes. There's not a lot of time to go into the details of the entire project. I mean, clearly this is a very, very large challenge, and it's not something which can be only solved by technology. However, I will be focusing on the technical innovations within this presentation. The other colleagues will discuss slightly a little bit more about the other aspects, but of course, we also plan to continue this interaction and would welcome you to, of course, stay in touch with us to that end. We'll be developing 4 technical services. They're based in large part on satellite data. They're called Explore, Support, Validate, and Quantify. Explore is essentially if I do A, B, or if I do B, C, what will happen compared to if I do nothing. Support are specific modules. They're related to the case studies. They're very context specific at this point. Validate essentially means what is happening in that field. Can we confirm that a certain practice is being implemented? And if not, what is the risk that it is not being implemented? Quantify essentially wants to create carbon soil maps in 2 points in time and then compare it to have a very accurate estimate of the change. These 4 services put together aim to simplify on-farm carbon credit registration to allow us to provide compensation for regenerative choices. I have to also mention, of course, that this is only one application of it, and it's only one of the applications that we are exploring. But we also realize that it is an important one in terms of the motivation side. So how do we deliver accuracy at a low cost? The very short answer for a 5-minute presentation is that we combine satellite data with farmer data and really any other data as much as possible. To give you an example with the Validate service, this would mean that, for example, we work with farmers like Duncan who tell us on this field, we've done measure A, let's say low tillage. On the other field, he's done something else, such as normal tillage practices, let's say. We collect a large amount of satellite data across several fields. We run them through machine learning techniques to train models, train algorithms, to be able to detect the difference. Of course, this is the ambition here. And then based on that, if this proves to be a good tool, we can later on use feed in any kind of field, which was not included in the study, and say whether it's implementing certain practices or not. The idea here is that these on-site visits are a key part of certification for organic agriculture and also for the carbon credit application that I mentioned. So we want to remove this step, which is a very costly one, to lower the prices of the overall process to certify for these things, and that this would be a benefit for farmers in terms of lower costs delivered. We're developing these together with farmers. We're working in 5 places in Europe right now and 1 place in Africa. Yeah, I don't have much time to go into the details, but I will mention one thing which I think is also important at this point, which is that for the technology I mentioned, and perhaps particularly for the service I mentioned, there's 2 ways to go about using this. One is to work with governments to essentially spy on what is going on the farms. And the second one is to be working with farmers for applications, as I mentioned, for example, to try to lower the price of certain schemes. It really can't be both of these. And I think it's quite important that as a project and as members of this project, for us, we've chosen the latter, to work with farmers. And yeah, it's quite important to make this distinction, and it's quite important moving forward to make this also clear that this is not technology that we'll be using to spy on people. As my final, I think, comment would be that besides these technical aspects, which I've very, very briefly summarized now, an important part of this is working with people who are already active in this field, including farmers, including advisors and others, and working towards, connecting existing networks and growing those networks to try to involve more people. And that's something that we also are quite dedicated to and we find quite important overall. So thank you very much for your attention. And of course, we look forward to future interactions with you when the opportunities do arise. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Igor. And I think, wow, gosh, of course, we do need those superpowers. Climate action is a superpower, and boy, oh boy, our farmers are superheroes. And I think we would all certainly agree to that. And I think you've really highlighted some of these technological solutions and how important it is, these 4 areas of explore, support, validate, and quantify. So thank you very, very much indeed for that, Igor. And please do put your questions in the chat and we will address those in a few minutes. So next, over to Celia. We've heard about some of the technological solutions, but of course, change for farmers is often complex for very many different reasons. And of course, with all the disruption that's going on, whether it be political, climate change, etc., then we really do need to understand. And one of my favorite sayings is very much around, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So collaboration is, as Igor's just said, really key. But Celia, can you expand a little bit more on some of the ways that we will be looking to overcome barriers to really drive change?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Caroline. You've already said the key point really that is at the core of this project, which is that we want to foster collaboration and create a space to work together, farmers with farmers, but also with other stakeholders, because we think change only happens really when people talk to each other. People who have already started the change can talk to others who haven't, and people, and exchange amongst each other. And so to foster that, we want to create a pan-European community of practice, essentially, a space where everyone can come in and exchange with others, exchange stories, good practice, learning from each other's mistakes, and really have this peer-to-peer exchange and learning, and also with other scientists or businesses, create those connections. That is really one of the key things we are going to try to do over the next 3 years. And to do that, in the first instance, of course, it will all be online, unfortunately. So we will have webinars and of course engage on social media, etc. But going forward, we hope to be able to also have some physical events, of course, and on-farm discussions, organize demonstration days on farms, etc. And that's where I think all of you come in. Obviously, we can't do this on our own, and we really hope that you will join us on this journey and participate further. I think it's quite clear that we couldn't give you all of the information today about all of the details of the project. So there will be further opportunities, more events, more blogs, etc., where we will explain what we're doing, and we will engage with people out there, all of you, and hopefully many others, to make sure that what we're doing is useful for our superhero farmers. And then, of course, there's another really important dimension to change, which is that the right economic incentives need to be in place. And so with this project, one avenue that we're looking into is carbon credits, potentially trying to see how farmers can get an extra income from selling carbon credits. But we're also investigating more of the policy levers, and maybe how public funds could be also used and could really be harnessed to achieve this change and this transition. So as we're working across the UK and also Europe, we'll be looking, of course, at the Common Agricultural Policy and at the new Agriculture Bill and other new policies that are being put in place in the UK. And to have this exchange also with policymakers to ensure that they are aware of the opportunities and of the needs of farmers to be supported in the right way. So we'll be communicating about all this, as I said. This is just the first public event that we have, but there will be many more, and we'll be sharing news and invitations to events on our social media and newsletters, etc. The links have been put in the chat, so we really hope that you will subscribe for news, follow us on Twitter. But we're also really keen to make sure that the way we communicate works for you. And so Caroline is going to introduce now a little poll that we've prepared, so we can make sure to really tailor our activities and communications to what works best for our audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Celia. And as you said, you know, we really want to make some noise about this and raise some stories. So Claire, can I ask you to launch the 2 polls that we now have? So get your fingers out to start voting shortly. Thank you.
And we'll just end it in a few moments. So you should be able to see the results there.
Emails, webinars and websites seem to be very popular, as well as social media. So, but emails in particular, that's a good one. If there are other means that you'd like to hear from, please do suggest those in the chat as well. So thank you for that. And
here we go with poll number 2.
Excellent.
I'll give a bit longer because there's some big answers to read through here. few more seconds. Thank you. We'll end it there.
Thank you. Well, that's an interesting and very strong. So 2 areas. I don't know what counts as regenerative, and I have concerns over the financial impacts. That's 2 very strong points, and the value of the impacts not developed enough. So we're going to have some questions now for Celia and Igor. Claire, I don't know if you've got any questions yet, but if while we're just waiting for that, can I just ask a quick one to Igor?
If everyone can ask their questions through the chat function, that would be cool.
That would be brilliant. Thank you. In terms of the barriers in particular, and I think it was loud and clear. Emails are a very good way of communicating, but the barriers, loud and clear, it came out about. I'm not really sure what regenerative is, and I'm just sort of wondering. And indeed, actually, Connor Deacons just put forward the question: what definition of regenerative is this project using? Is the project going to sort of hone in much more effectively as to a definitive question and response as to what regenerative is? So Celia and Igor, I don't know if you would like to answer that. Igor, thank you.
Yeah, I see Celia also turned on her mic, so I'll provide
go first, Igor.
brief answer, and yeah, Celia can follow up. I think that we're still discussing that. In fact, I think that's one of the key questions at this point. We, of course, have some indication and direction through LEAF and through their experiences with integrated farm management and in general with farm sustainability. Of course, we also have it with other partners that are involved in regenerative agriculture, such as the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. And we have already started exchanging with other regenerative, of course, networks that label themselves as regenerative to try to kind of own in on this definition. But actually, I think I'll let Celia comment further. And if we want to come up with a specific definition, I think we should also activate Becky, as she provided a very, very good one recently. So we could repeat that also here. Celia?
Yeah, thanks. I don't have that much to add to what you've just said. Indeed, we did put some, I wouldn't call it a definition, more of a sort of a few criteria on our website for what we consider to be regenerative agriculture. And the key thing that we're saying on the website is that it's not one clear definition. It is a set of principles, and it's more about, I guess, a mindset than really ticking boxes. So we are exploring the different principles for the project, but further down the line, we will probably hone it down to more of a definition, since we are investigating the potential for creating a certification for regenerative agriculture, which would require indeed really setting the rules for what counts as regenerative and what doesn't. But that is something that LEAF is doing, but really further down the line. So I guess we will have a better answer to that in 2 years.
Becky, do you want to just add to that? And then Claire, if you could then go through the next questions.
Yeah, of course. I'm trying to wrap my brain about what Igor was mentioning when I talked about it. And I think the goal of the project isn't necessarily to create a definition. You know, we're not setting out to define what regenerative agriculture is. At the moment, it's a bit of both. We have this idea, you know, where soil is the basis of production and a living soil, and it's all about promoting that living sort of ecosystem which promotes sustainable agriculture and ecosystem services. And it's, yes, that we have those 5 core principles around, you know, keeping the ground covered, integrating livestock, bigger biodiversity, more living roots, but it's about that mindset, and it's about that journey we take from sort of A to B. And we're wanting to speak with everybody. We want to speak with you all. And what do you all think regenerative is? And is it about? It's not just about regeneration; it's about generation as well. And there's so many things out there. And it's probably important to remember as well, there's no legal definition, there's no standard of what regenerative agriculture is. So it's a bit of a journey at the moment, I think, for us and for everybody.
Thank you, Becky. That was great. Caroline, I'd probably quite like to direct this one to you, actually, if that's okay. But a great question here from our friend Andrew Francis. How does regenerative agriculture differ from IFM?
So we certainly,
Management, sorry, for those that might not know the acronym.
Oh, yeah, integrated farm management. So for us, regenerative is part of, it's hand in hand with integrated farm management. I think it would be fair to say that the majority of farmers that are really far down the line of integrated farm management will be addressing the principles of IFM. And indeed, integrated farm management goes beyond the regenerative piece. I think what actually it's allowing us to do now is refine those areas that are most under pressure, namely soil, and trying to get on top of the carbon challenges and things like that. So for us, it goes hand in hand with the IFM approaches. And I think that will be something, certainly, because obviously we run a farm assurance scheme with LeafMark. That's something in terms of whether there are sort of within the drive for reaching and achieving LeafMark, there will be, that capability to demonstrate regenerative practices within that as well. So these are certainly questions at the forefront of our mind. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much. A question for Igor, if that's okay. Just could you elaborate a little bit on how you're ground truthing the methods for measuring and mapping soil carbon?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, it boils down in the end to soil samples, whether they're provided by farmers or whether they come from national surveys. I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that. And in the end, the platform should have the flexibility to integrate any soil data we have. So whether it's collected through, handheld spectrometers, or whether we actually take laboratory soil samples, but it's pretty much unavoidable to not take soil samples. We require soil samples one way or another. But perhaps I would only add to that there are a lot of soil samples already. And yes, Ish, who is much more expert on this subject, is saying sampling is good, which I think is the overall answer to that question.
I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that from Duncan as well in a few minutes, Claire.
Exactly. And just from the perspective of the European partners on this project, it would be great to hear your thoughts on whether the principles of regenerative agriculture are identical and universal across the world, or whether they're, is that an assumption that we're making and we would find in different territories and climates and locations that those principles might be different.
Igor, do you want to, you mentioned about Africa and obviously the engagement of the sort of 6 sites and then Africa as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a large differences between the sites, and that's actually part of the challenge of the project, or rather the challenge that we wanted to take up with the project, is that regenerative doesn't apply to only one place. We can't say it's the same for, these small olive orchards that we're looking at Crete, for the rather more advanced regenerative farms that we're working with in the UK, the very, very large farms that we're working in Poland, and the flower farms that we're working with in Africa. So what we're trying to do essentially is listen, develop these technical tools that we feel have a potential to give value for certain issues that we've identified, and tailor them to the needs of local farmers. If that is clear.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you. Should we move on, Claire? I'm sure, I know there's lots of questions coming through, but
we have more time to answer them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed. And it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Phil Jarvis. I'm sure many of you will know. Phil, we've heard some of the sort of the barriers that have been highlighted. We've seen and just heard some of the discussion around trying to hone in what this is really going to look like. So can you explain a little bit about what the project will be doing to support farmers in, and obviously it's going to be experimental all the way. This is a research project at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, I think if I might just start with the last question by definitions. And if you want a definition of what regenerative agriculture is, we don't really want to box it into a corner. But also, if we don't have a definition, sometimes it's difficult to support and investigate. So there are some conundrums there, but the last one might be where we want to start. I think from our point of view, really being clear to farmers and practitioners what this whole project is about, you know, regenerative agriculture practices, measuring carbon, and a carbon scheme that's well researched and benefits all. So some clear messages on that. Our aim and our part of it on barriers is about information on regenerative agriculture. So highlighting those pitfalls and challenges so that both farmers and Igor mentioned governments as well, because this journey along this route is not just going to be on one section of society. We're all going to have to play our part here. So explain, so we can travel on that journey together. So also to explain how we can address those barriers, because actually once we address those barriers, there's a tremendous opportunity for the land-based sector to help address climate change. And I think, you know, regenerative agriculture is a really positive statement. And I think the one thing I would say about it is that you know, regenerative agriculture has to be positive for the environment, but it also has to be positive from the financial aspects of our business as well, because, you know, there's a lot of businesses that can help in this, but they have to be economically viable. So there's going to be some changes about the way we farm, you know, and we've already alluded to some of these, Becky has, around, you know, soil cover and cultivation and wider rotations, grass, livestock, IPM, a whole host of things around plant protection products. But it's going to be different for each sector. In fact, it's going to be different for many countries, and it's going to be often tailored down to individual growers. So a lot of decision making, I think our effort is to try and help growers in that arena. But as I mentioned, it's a journey, and it's a journey to help farmers as well. Yeah. So it's a really positive thing. And Igor's already mentioned, this is from olive groves in Crete to large scale landscape change and farms in Poland. You know, and certification and practices in the United Kingdom. We're going to hear from Duncan in a minute about some of those actual on the ground practices. But we'll also be looking at public commitments and working with Lancashire County Council about how this fits into some of those society connections as well. And then we're looking at revisiting financial, how we overcome those financial barriers with our partners in Serbia as well. So this really is an exciting European, and as we've mentioned, you know, becoming global with the introduction of countries like Kenya. But the Allerton project will really be looking at real land use examples, stepping stones on that journey, really. You know, starting with the principles, feeding in case studies, looking at individual countries. And I think we're going to end up with a really exciting, vibrant, regenerative agricultural community where everybody gets to feed in from the bottom up, as well as being told from the top down what it's going to be. And I think that's really good. And really my final comment, Caroline, is that, you know, regenerative agriculture and capturing carbon is such a positive approach to landscape management that it's a route that's well worth traveling along. And whilst we sometimes can get focused on the small picture on our farms, we've got a massive global challenge in front of us. And the quicker we can get, and it's great to see nearly 150 people on this call, if we can harness that power to address things and affect both our land use practices and government, we're onto a real winner.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Phil. And as you say, you know, I think both GWCT and ourselves share that real framing of can-do approach. And if it's positive and there are practical solutions, then actually it makes it far more enjoyable as well. So that is really critical, because this is, you know, yes, it's a big challenge, but you know, let's not get down about it. Let's really be proactive. And as you say, that vibrant community that we're looking to really build and continue to drive is absolutely key. So thank you very much, Phil.
Caroline, could I just add one comment that whilst we might have some overarching principles, where this becomes vibrant and people have ownership of it is when they feed in their own country, their own farms, practices that they'd like to see, and that's really key for making this work, having the ownership down at farm level.
So I think that's probably a good challenge to everybody around the table, the tour de table today, is to really think, you know, what can you do in this area, and what is going to be your contribution, even whether it's sort of joining the newsletter list or actually coming up with some ideas. We've tried this and it works, or it doesn't work. So thank you. And certainly on to our final speaker now, Duncan. One of the things that really, I mean, I know Duncan's been sort of doing soil organic matter testing for very many years, but we now know that some 42% of LEAF Marque certified businesses record soil organic matter. And that's, you know, that's very high on a country level. And I think it's something that, as the chat is going down as well, is something that's really, really key. So Duncan, for you, what is this project going to help you with, and how will it drive the change on and build on a lot of what you've already been doing as well?
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline. And I think it's brilliant to be involved in a project like this. And as several of you have already said, it's much better to do these things together because we can share our good experiences and our bad experiences. And I've had plenty of those over the years, but it's a good way to learn from things. Now, I think agriculture is unique from all other industries in the world because we can be part of the good news story for climate change. This isn't just about sort of trying to describe what regenerative agricultural practices are. This is actually about trying to find a solution to the climate change and the greenhouse gas emissions. So agriculture can be part of that good news story as opposed to being seen as part of the problem, which is the case from many sectors and commentaries at the moment. So I've been practicing this journey. I've been on this journey for a long time, for the last 25 years or so. And yes, I'm moving less soil. I've broadened my crop rotation, which in itself has reduced the amount of nitrogen fertilizer I've used, and getting healthier crops. We are growing cover crops and companion crops, and all these different practices, they are leading not only to carbon sequestration, but also importantly to more nutritious soil generally. And if we've got more nutritious soil, we can grow more nutritious food and serve a healthier consumer eventually, who can have a healthier diet. And I see there's been lots of questions on, you know, how do we do carbon testing, and what's the, you know, who's going to buy it and what's the value of it? Well, a lot of these things are still very much not unknowns, but there's not a perfect method yet. And that is the whole point of this AgriCapture CO2 project, is first of all to try and find an internationally accepted, verified and certifiable method of measuring soil matter, organic matter. And on our farm alone, the one sort of experimental field I use, I've increased the soil organic matter between 2002 and 2021 by a whopping 76%. But that's just on a standard farmer soil survey. So I walk across a field, take random samples. Now, I don't know whether the depth I'm doing it or the geo positioning I'm doing it is correct or not. And that's just from my results. And that has a huge benefit. I've got, in ballpark figures, nearly 4,000 tons of carbon I could trade every year. But I could trade that today if I wanted. There are bodies now looking at buying carbon, but would I be selling it at the right price? What is the price of carbon? Is it sort of £3.50 a tonne, or is it £85 a tonne? And it depends who you talk to on how much it is valued. And also, I don't want to go and get tied up in the wrong scheme for too long and take the money now and then find out I've either been totally overpricing or completely underpricing. So the whole project is about finding out together a better way of measuring the carbon, a reliable way that people trust, and eventually lead into a market that is trusted internationally, so that those industries that don't have the pleasure of using the power of the sun to absorb carbon can actually offset some of their carbon emissions. And I just saw one of the questions was, is that letting those dirty industries off the hook? Well, I don't see it like that, because say we want to fly again one day and we all want to go on a holiday, and you might pay 80 or 100 pounds a tonne for the carbon emissions for your journey on the aeroplane, but that's a choice you make. So it's all about choices, and the carbon and the pollution as a society, we will have to be paying for it in the future. because long term, we want to be handing a better world to the next generation and to those beyond that. So just very quickly in summary, I see agriculture, both in the UK and on a European and in an international scale, having 4 areas of produce, and it's going to be a bit of a pick and mix. So the first one still has to be the food we produce, whether that's rapeseed and wheat in my case, whether it's olives in the Crete case study, whether it's dairy and milk or onions in Suffolk. So we produce high quality food and get paid for that. The second part of the agricultural income, I see it as coming from public money for public goods. And that's where governments become involved and pay us when we sort of look after the water and the air and the soil indeed around us, and maybe public access and various other bits. And the third bit, which I see agriculture being involved in, is the getting paid maybe by both public and private, or one or the other, but from different sectors for regenerative practices, and eventually, hopefully, at the end of this project, being able to be paid for carbon and carbon trading. And the final one I see as a potential which some farms may or may not want to do, but is actually, once you're doing these good things, maybe is an opportunity for ecotourism there, for people to come and want to plant trees on your farm, or want to come and clean out water courses, and they may well pay to do it, or just be volunteers to help you as the farmer do it. And not every farm's going to have income from all 4 of those, but it's going to give us the choice of where we get our income from. And also, I think personally, as the owner of a brand selling to supermarkets, it gives us a brilliant story to actually engage with our end consumers and our customers at the end of the day. So I think it's a great project, and I'm really looking forward to getting it really going and learning a lot on this journey together, as Phil mentioned. It's much better to do it together than it is individually. So yeah, thank you, Caroline.
Thank you very much indeed, Duncan. And I think it was actually Jonathan Wadsworth from the World Bank who said, don't go lower than $65 US a ton for your carbon. So, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what we can get to, and really critical about, you know, what as a superhero you will be able to achieve going forwards as well. So thank you for that. And as I was reminded by one of our members not so long ago around the health agenda in particular, he said, I get it now. I'm going to put the vitamin tablet industry out of business, because obviously good food is lying at the heart of all of this. So brilliant. Thank you, Duncan. Claire, I think we've now got 2 more polls, please.
So we have one more poll.
One more poll. Apologies. One more poll.
And I'll launch that right now.
Do scroll down on this poll. There's it's 2 questions within one. Might end up missing. It's like an exam paper, not turning over.
Just as we're waiting there, I remember at Shuttleworth College when I used to lecture, I used to put an exam paper in front of the students, which had at the beginning of it, read all the questions, and then it had 20 questions, one which was stand up and shout fire at this point, and about 3/4 of the students would stand up and shout fire. And then the last question was, do not answer any of the questions that are set in this exam paper. So it's the classic, read all the exam questions first.
So a few more seconds and then I'll draw that to an end. So I will share the results. So for the first section of the question, can you see them there, Caroline?
I can indeed, yes. Cover crops, very, very popular. And min-till, all good practices, really.
And then for the second part of the question.
Agroforestry.
Indeed.
Wow. But also really popular. Interesting, reduced grazing. Is that the
water at the bottom is very high on the list as well.
Oh, yes. Golly, actually just about everyone a winner with the exception of possibly the reduced grazing piece. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Claire. Thank you for those. Right, we've now got a few minutes for some direct questions to Phil and Duncan to start off with. I am now handing you that very difficult task, Claire, to pick and choose some of the brilliant questions that have come forward.
Thank you. And can I encourage you to carry on asking questions, please? So I don't know whether we have the answer to this question, probably direct it at Duncan, but what happens if there is trading happening now and there is a realization that there needs to be refunds later? How do we envisage that that might happen? Or is that tied in with don't trade too quickly now?
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard the question for refunds. I don't know if anyone's going to have much chance of refunds. There's nothing wrong with trading now. I'm not saying don't do it. And there's lots of bodies out there looking at doing this sort of thing. And Agri-Capture wants to work with those. We don't see people as, or different organisations necessarily as being competing, because all these different organisations looking at carbon trading and setting a price are all going to help find the right answer for the long-term solution. So my one warning would be, if you want to go and trade something now, just look at the term that you sign up for, because it might be better to get £5 a tonne now on something you're doing, but you might not want to sign that up for 20 years. So think like your electricity bill or your phone bill. You know, if it looks a good deal and if it looks too good, there might be a reason for it. But yeah, sign up for a short period.
Thank you. Can I direct the question to Celia as well, please?
Thank you. So I just wanted to comment on that one, that there's different approaches and different schemes that are already existing. Sometimes what they do is that they make a sort of buffer account. So if you sequester 10 tonnes, you will only get money for 8 of them, and put 2 tonnes in that sort of, you know, insurance account, so that if you have a reversal later on, that the reimbursement would go from there, if you see what I mean. So that's one way that it's been done. It's clearly a really important issue, of course, because with any carbon credits, you need to have something robust. If you don't have a robust system that can ensure the permanence, you lose value. So I know that at the EU level, at least, these are issues that are being explored by the European Commission, who are looking into setting up some rules for really going towards a robust system for certifying carbon removals from land use. It might or might not include agriculture. So there's really lots of really important questions here that we will be exploring in the project. Carbon credits are just one thing that one mechanism that we're exploring for rewarding farmers. It might not be the best one. So if that's something that you feel really passionate about, or that you're interested in, do stay in the loop, and we will have further discussions on all these really critical topics. Thank you, Claire.
Great, thanks, Celia. A question here, possibly to Phil, but please do correct me. It will be interesting to see how the practices linked to Sustainable Farming Incentive of ELMS, which offer to pay farmers for actions that deliver public goods. Are the practices being tested in any pilots, to your knowledge? Oh, Phil, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I'm sure they are. I mean, there are at least 40 or 50 tests and trials, and I'm sure carbon was. I mean, just link this question to the last one as well, in the fact that Agri-Capture may end up signposting you to schemes. And remember that if you enter a contract, you maybe enter a contract that's on a fixed rate, and contracts in the future may well develop flexible rates. So that's something that might, but once you're signed, you're usually in there for 10 years. Coming back to sustainable farming incentive, I think this is one of the other areas that people have got to be very careful of, is that they don't exclude themselves from actually being able to apply for some of the funding that might come out of the woodland and some of the, and this would be the same as I would imagine in European funding as well going forward, making sure you exclude yourself. So we need blended finance options that are tested in all, so the journey is with the public sector, with the farmer on the ground and the private sector. And they may all well pay a third of what the actual value is, rather than actually excluding anybody else and the farmer being left with only a third of the value.
Claire, can we just sort of link that to as well to potential investment funds as well? And Phil, I don't know if you've got any insight or any thoughts around the fact that for some farmers trying to make radical changes will require significant investment, maybe in machinery or infrastructure. Are you any thoughts in that area?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, and I'll talk from a UK's perspective, but I know this journey is being travelled down in Europe as well, in the fact that you've got a combination of sustainable farming includes two parts. It's about being positive for the environment and positive for your business. So a lot of the options that are available in the new environmental schemes will be very much around carbon capturing and biodiversity protection or enhancement and water protection. But there are also things that are win-wins in this area. So things like slurry storage grants, which we know will stop greenhouse gas emissions, but also and potentially water pollution incidents, but will also make the business more efficient. So I think, productivity grants, there are a number of areas. For me, it's the complexity of getting into all of them. So we must make sure they're on farm, they're practical, and the word is streamlined.
Great, thank you, Phil. So a question here, given we need to change and payment is likely to be made based on change and not the status quo, do we agree that the value for existing good practice may be difficult to achieve in comparison? Possibly one for Duncan, possibly one for Phil.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, so we are talking a lot about getting paid for carbon, but we don't want to just get hung up on that, because as Phil's just been saying, and what Igor started with was using earth observation and encouraging farmers to do certain regenerative type practices. It might be that we could, or not might be, that we will be paid for doing those things. So for example, if I was a Crete olive oil producer and I was growing my olive trees, and underneath the olive trees there's bare land which is going to, one, suffer from erosion and runoff in a rain event, but more importantly it's going to lose the carbon from the soil when it sort of heats up and there's nothing growing there. It might be using a mulch over that ground, which is going to retain moisture and stop the variation in soil temperature, and actually help the olive grower grow more sustainable olives, or better reliable yields of olives, but also doing good for the environment as well. And with the earth observation, that's what we'll be able to measure that. So it will be being paid for doing those practices. Now the question comes that, well, if I'm already doing that, there's no incentive. Maybe I should go and rip out all the good things and get paid again. That's, well, one, morally you got to look at yourself in the mirror and think, is that a real, because we're doing this because we have got a climate crisis. So one, you need to really take a hard look at those sorts of questions and answers. But also the whole agriculture CO2 project is actually looking at backdating as well. So it might be that farmers like myself might be able to have some income because we have already started on this journey. Because otherwise, there could be an argument, why do I bother? Let's wait until someone's going to come and pay us. But I think that's incredibly dangerous if we go down that route.
Yeah, Claire, it's a real conundrum, as Duncan's alluded to, because we really need an escalator that gets you up to where we need to be. And different farmers can jump on that escalator at different points as we get to where that end goal is. Because being rewarded for what you've already done, a lot of farmers will have naturally, without doing much, will have some natural capital and ecosystem services that perhaps we need to find, perhaps through government, a way of rewarding it. But really, if we're going to solve this climate challenge, we need to be doing new stuff as well. We can't just count old stuff and say we've solved the problems of the planet. We need to be sequestering, so new planting, hedgerows, you know, a whole host of things that actually mean that there's perhaps the private marketplace or utility companies or something can come in and say we need to create new carbon sequestration to help, and there's a reward there. So it's blended, so blended finance.
And not unrelated to this, how do we see the situation for farmers that are renting land, etc., and where they're moving on to new land or new tenants come in? Have we considered within the project whether this can relate practically to those tenancy agreements, etc.?
Do you want me to just start on that briefly?
You start that, Phil. Thank you.
I think whether we've actually addressed it in this project is for discussion, and perhaps Igor might be able to answer after I've just said another sentence or two, which is obviously what's valuable on the farm now is slightly changing. It was usually based on outcome from your crops in your field. Well, if your natural capital is worth more and your landlord decides that they want to benefit from that, I think that's a negotiation to have with your agent about what rent you're paying. And I think that land ownership is a problem. We want to encourage everybody to do it. And the practical farmer, the working farmer on the ground, has to have the reward for reducing potentially his income from crops or from livestock and putting it into something else, and then someone else taking the reward. So yeah, there's an interesting discussion on rents, I think. Igor, I don't know if you've got any comments.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to comment in general about the financial mechanisms relating to regenerative agriculture. As we saw with the poll, this is a key consideration with regards to motivation and, well, to help create decisions to go forward for a farmer, which of course is not an easy one, clearly. I think that carbon credits are only part of the story, and this will be limited by, of course, a lot of things. One of our use cases, to give you an example, the farms are about 0.2 hectares. These are small olive farms in Crete. This is an extremely, well, semi-arid, but I would even say partially arid environment. It's getting hotter, and of course the challenges are growing there. But the natural capacity for those soils to store carbon is not very high. Carbon credits from soil, of course, sequestration will never be something which for them would be a significant financial opportunity. It's more about making use of various tools, various schemes, various, of course, organizational innovations to try to drive compensation through new or existing revenue streams. To be a little bit more concrete, in this use case, what we want to do is create, well, much like Leaf has created, a branded, well, okay, that's a little bit different as a certification, but we want to create a branded olive oil, which is zero emissions or low emissions. We still haven't figured that one out, but that has a lot more potential than the carbon credit, creating them and selling them, part of the story, which is also part of the project. And it can, of course, be meaningful to some farmers. I think, to go back to a conversation I also had with Duncan quite some time ago, I think this is also a challenge within even the UK, which might naturally have a higher potential on the average level, but farmers that are on sandy soils, of course, have a much lower potential as well. So would carbon credits necessarily be a good tool to motivate them, to support them to make this change? Probably not, but there's of course a lot of variation.
Claire, can I just ask a supplementary question of Igor? And you're right, Andrew Francis, who farms in the Brecklands, has unfortunately just left, but I think that is a critical area in terms of recognizing where reduced erosion may be a good measure of improving the soil health piece. But I think Poland are involved in the project as well. And some of the challenges, certainly we have potato growers who are over in Poland, and they may have, in 1,000 acres, they may have something like 500 landlords. Do you see something like that as a sort of something that within the project we might be able to address? Igor.
Thank you for clarifying. If I remember the details of these processes with regards to the ones that we've been looking at, you need a confirmation essentially from the owner of the land that this will be indeed a permanent commitment. Did they call this permanence, if not mistaken? This is a challenge actually that all carbon credit schemes will have, even the ones that are now being considered or planned from the government level, from the policy level. If you don't own the land, you need to be able to show that this is something which will last for 100 years. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to claim that the changes will result, that the changes being made will be permanent. And that is something which is required because, of course, it's an offsetting mechanism. You're saying this is now in the soil, and this part could then offset another emission going up. So if you put them together, the net is zero. And that's, well, just to repeat myself, requires this to be actually permanent.
So is permanent as in a permanent marker pen, or, you know, or permanent forever? So
well, I think it's defined bureaucratically as 100 years, but there should be a documentable commitment and, you know, proof of it that this is going to last at least 100 years.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A really important question. So when it comes to looking at your own carbon, do you think it's going to be critical or imperative that a farm must offset their own carbon footprint before they start to look at trading? Or do you think that there's a risk that that might not be enforced?
I think Celia was keen to answer that.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say on this point, obviously it will depend also on your business model. There may be a business case for doing it so that you can sell your product as being carbon neutral or you know, zero carbon or whatever. But so it seems often, at least in the EU, there's a bit of a misconception maybe that agriculture has to go to net zero, which is not necessarily the case. It's not really possible if you just look at agriculture. If you include forestry, it's a different matter, and it will depend from country to country, of course. But what's really important here is that farmers have a role to play, and that they can contribute to the climate crisis. You know, and then whether that offset is for the farm itself or if it's sold on. I mean, it really will depend from farm to farm, but I'm not aware of any government intending to put an obligation on every farm to become carbon neutral. That would be very inefficient and unrealistic. So I would say that really relates to your business model and how you want to market your products rather than any obligation coming from elsewhere.
Caroline, could I just add in there that I think it would seem strange to me to sell something into a marketplace when actually you probably need, if you're not net zero, you probably need to go into the marketplace and buy it yourself. So I think from a farmer's perspective, things like nitrogen use efficiency, energy efficiency, use of technology in plant breeding should be areas that farmers should be looking at. And then, of course, we'll move into another conundrum. Duncan mentioned the conundrum over soil testing and carbon testing. We'll start talking about carbon calculators. Which calculator do you use to establish your net zero? But I think farmers should go on a journey to try and get to net zero so that the new carbon that they've got is then for sale and with a clear conscience that they're actually doing their bit and have done as much to their businesses as they can.
Thank you very much. I've got a really important question here.
Sorry, Claire, Duncan wanted to just add on that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Duncan.
You're reading questions.
Well, I was just quickly going to say, so when we got our carbon neutrality, that was certified by the United Nations. And at the moment, the UN, because of this ongoing debate that we're having today about how do you test carbon correctly and how can it be verified and all the rest of it. So the UN do not look at our soil carbon sequestration. So our carbon neutrality came about by looking at electricity, fertilizer, fuel, and all the things that we contribute. And we came out as net carbon emitters, which we then have offset with, for example, green energy and forestry use in Uruguay. So if I want to claim I'm carbon neutral, or Farrington Oils wants to claim it's carbon neutral, we have to first of all be carbon neutral. Now then, if we had our soils in as part of that calculation and we had some net soil carbon sequestration we could sell, that's fine. But I don't see how I would be able to sell it and then still be the wrong side of the balance sheet and claim we're carbon neutral. I haven't explained that very well, but sorry, Claire, you carry on.
No, I think you explained that brilliantly. Thank you, Duncan. There's a really, really good pertinent question here in terms of of the farming industry being encouraged to be carbon sinks, but how does that sit and reconcile with still producing food and the increased demand for food?
Can I answer that?
Do you want to take that?
Okay, if I can answer that first, and then because Celia mentioned this, that it might be the case that not every farming business can be carbon neutral. So I know Andrew Francis has just left, and whenever I talk about this, I always think of his farm. And those that you don't know, he farms on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, growing thousands of tons of onions on basically sand. And his soil is never going to absorb the carbon that my wet Northamptonshire clay soils are going to absorb. And we still need food. So food production is very important. And it goes back to my pick and mix. So some farms will concentrate, and again, think of Dutch farmers that are incredibly efficient at growing fresh produce and have done a lot over the years to increase how they can do that off a small area. And they concentrate maybe on growing nutritious food and not doing diffuse pollution through water pollution, but they aren't necessarily going to absorb carbon there. But then if farms like ours can absorb carbon, and forestry and other farming practices around Europe and around the globe, overall, we will be able to hopefully grow good, nutritious food for society and have the ability to net absorb CO2.
Yeah, I'd just add to that really, if you look at carbon usually leaves our field as either meat or produce, and it was interesting in the poll, Caroline, that the one that didn't find much favour was lower grazing, because most of that grazing is nice efficient grass that goes into a nice efficient product, and that the ground that's left behind, yes, has some roots and that, but it could actually be woody grassy growth that actually captures carbon. And I think the difficulty is there, that of course, what's the economic model for that? And with a rising population to feed, you just then don't have the luxury of saying, well, actually, we've only got one planet, but we've got a rising population. There's tremendous population pressure on that sort of system. And I'll just quote a figure here that if you look from the figures that are quoted in the 1970s in the United Kingdom, there are 12 million more people in the country. So with that pressure, finding a solution is going to be difficult. But I think we have to try and get a balance between food production, not destroying some of our pristine habitats around the rest of the world, and that economic model.
Thank you, Phil. And we have time for one more question, and I'd like to stretch this along the supply chain a little bit. So could I get views on what the role of retailers and brands is in this conversation? So we're talking very much about farmers at the moment, but what is the role of supply chain here? Phil, as you smiled, I'm going to direct that to you.
Well, I was just smiling because Duncan knows exactly where this is going. I was just thinking of Mellow Yellow as a brand, Duncan, just giving you a bit of time to get your thoughts together. Look at that. Okay.
Nice plug.
I don't know if you want to go about the role of brands, Duncan.
Okay, I'll give it a go, but I was waiting for someone else to come in. But yeah, so this is from a retail perspective then, or as a brand selling to a retail perspective, they are really getting on board and behind this. So, you know, if you'd have asked me 5 years ago at director level of a supermarket, I know one or two of them, and, you know, very nice people, and you go into their conferences and they talk about how their corporate social responsibility on their employees and their growers, and how we want to be sustainable and all the rest of it. And they'd talk about all these wonderful things they were doing and Vision 2020 or whatever it was. But then when you're in a cupboard in a supermarket head office somewhere and trying to sell them your latest product, and they're bashing you over the head on price, that message from the corporate level didn't get back down to the buyer level. Move on to today, and now it's that message really has got down to the commercial team, or it certainly has in the commercial teams we talk to. So it's not just a high level aspiration, it is now becoming something that the buyers are looking at. And I think this will only increase because, you know, I've got two daughters, one in doing A levels, the other in second year at university. And it's that generation, the Greta generation, that are going into jobs and will do over the next few years. And they are asking the questions of their parents and the choices they make in their own personal lives. So I think the push or the pull is going to come commercially from our customers, and we've got to run with it and use it to our advantage. And as I said at the start, be part of the solution, because we can be. So I think it's a very positive outlook.
And Claire, we're working with companies like Nestle and Kellogg's, who actually are moving faster than perhaps some of the governments to achieve net zero. So that, you know, they're talking about even 2030 and even beyond, you know, targets for 50% in the next 5 years. So that part of the industry is taking and working with farmers to help them achieve that. So yeah, brands are on the journey as well.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Claire. And I think we need to be very careful, though, within the branding piece, that it doesn't become sort of top trumps on who can get there first down to the lowest carbon zero piece. And I think one thing, you know, I will put a little plug for Leaf Marque, because without a doubt, we are able to demonstrate some really positive impacts, not only at a regenerative level, but also on the broader whole farm approach. So I think, you know, if there are a few questions about, well, where do we start? You know, well, start going towards the journey of being Leaf Marque certified is a good help, because and doing the Leaf Sustainable Farming Review. But of course, please get involved in this project as well. So just as before we all leave, and gosh, there are loads more questions there, I know, Claire, and I think we'll probably try and address them. And it looks like we actually probably need another extended special sort of surgery on this as well, because it's been a fantastic engagement from everybody right across Europe. Thank you so much, everyone. But just really, I'd like to ask our panelists for one takeaway message for our audience. So Igor, what would be your key nugget for everybody?
Yes, I mean, to kind of detract from the message I had earlier, I think it's very important to work together, because we're still figuring this out. Nobody has all the answers, and it is an extremely large challenge. But on the other hand, I think it will also be a very, very large reward if we get it right.
Thank you. And yes, and keep on sharpening up that superpower and be a superhero. So brilliant. Thank you, Igor. Celia.
Thanks, Caroline. Very much in the same line. I think it's really exciting and invigorating to see all the discussions and the questions today, which makes us really realize that there's a lot of knowledge and energy and opinions out there that we can tap into for this project. So please, I mean, I've said it already 2 or 3 times, so I'm starting to feel like a parrot, but do sign up for our mailing list, or for, you know, follow us on Twitter so that we can continue this conversation with you. We're really looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, so again, you know, do go to the chat to find those oh, thank you, Claire, the Twitter handle and the newsletter as well. Phil.
Yeah, they've changed quite a lot just even in this meeting, but I want to revisit what I said before, the regenerative agriculture and capturing carbon. It's such a positive message to landscape management that we really ought to be on this route, and it's a journey that's well worth travelling on. So please, I echo Celia, get signed up.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. I think it's loud and clear, so if you're not signed up already by midday, please make sure you do. Duncan.
I think all I'd say is I find it far more enjoyable trying to be part of the solution. So get on board, let's go on this journey together and have fun doing it, and we'll all learn from each other.
Thank you. Yes, and I think that collaboration has come out loud and clear. The caution element is in there in terms of actually looking at the options, blended opportunities, but please remember this is a research project, and part of that is looking at options, understanding the barriers, understanding the sort of the elephant traps in there as well, so that we can really create change ultimately, which is what we're really striving to do with this project. So a huge thank you to our speakers today. Brilliant job. And of course, a huge thank you to you, the audience, as well. Many of you have been not only proactive in providing some solutions to our answers, but who've also, I know we will be calling on to get engaged with us if you're not already engaged as well.